I'm interested in. Keep it. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Hello, everyone. I'm psychic medium Christopher George, and along with Victor the Voice.
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Hello, everyone. I'm psychic medium Christopher George, and along with Victor the Voice Furman with Second Sight NYC. Victor, who's our guest this week?
Chris, our guest this week is Annie Kagan, a chiropractor living in Manhattan who abandoned her hectic city life in search of serenity in a small, secluded house by the bay. He died unexpectedly and began speaking to her from the afterlife. Annie agreed to accompany him on his journey through the mysteries of death. As Billy reaches out from the other side to change his sister's life and the lives of those around her, he shares secrets about the bliss and wonder of life to come in her book, The Afterlife of Billy Fingers, How My Bad Boy Brother Proved to Me There Is Life After Death.
Well, if he was a bad boy and he made it to heaven, I guess there's hope for me yet.
We'll do our best every week to delve into the unexplained, weird, intriguing, and sometimes creepy topics you won't hear on your local news. I'm your host, Chip, and along with me is my co-host, Nicole. You can catch The Mind Cemetery every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for 2 hours exclusively here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. If you like what you hear, then subscribe to us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter by searching Mind Cemetery. You can also find us on iTunes by searching UFO Paranormal Radio Network, listen to our archives on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network main page, and go deeper into the archives by searching for The Mind Cemetery on blogtalkradio.com. You can find us online at mindcemetery.com. While on our site, you will find our show calendar to see who we will have on as a guest in the near future. Check out the strange news feed, peruse our extensive archive of past shows in our archive blogs, track UFO activity via the Alien Stalker, and as always, be sure to check out the critically acclaimed, often imitated but never duplicated mindcemetery.com blog, where you can get information on upcoming shows, information on past shows, and plenty of interesting nuggets and tidbits that are blogged about throughout the week. You can join the discussion in the UFO Paranormal Radio Network chat room on Pal Talk, or call in to ask your favorite hosts and guests your own questions on our show hotline. That number, information on past shows, and plenty of interesting nuggets and tidbits that are blogged about throughout the week. You can join the discussion in the UFO Paranormal Radio Network chat room on Pal Talk, or call in to ask your favorite hosts and guests your own questions on our show hotline. That number is 504-273-7379.
To the Mind Cemetery for another week with us here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. First of all, I love this network. I completely deserve to be on this network. Every week it's something different that happens, and it's never a dull moment. And I just wish everybody could hear sometimes the pre-chat that goes on before we get called. Sometimes it's a little last-minute setup, as usual, but that's fine. That's the way we do it here. It's the way you handle it, and you just roll with it. No Nicole this week, and probably no Nicole ever again. She doesn't want to do the show anymore. I can't imagine why. Maybe we'll discuss that sometime. I think, on the 15th I have open lines? Maybe we'll air some grievances then. It's Festivus early. So yeah, I may be in the market for a co-host. Who knows? I don't know. Depends on if I can jibber jabber myself enough every week, which I'm pretty sure I can. But anyway, phone lines are open tonight. We're going to have we're going to have Michael Jordan on later for everybody who's interested. I know that's like the third rail in the UFO paranormal world, talking sports, but I'm going to do it a little bit here in a minute. But yeah, Micah Hanks, that is, coming on here, talking about his new book, The UFO Singularity, and plenty of other projects he's involved in and doing and talking on and writing a lot, you know. So yeah, he'll be on here in a few minutes. We're going to do a little news before we get started here. Maybe I should think up of a better beginning than just flying by the seat of my pants. I don't know. But we are trying to structure it a little bit to where we do a little news in the beginning, because that seems to be a formula that works for other shows. But then again, you know, mine was doing just fine, but Nicole seemed to think it wasn't as structured for everyone, because God knows we love structure. We are creatures of habit, or just regular creatures. So anyway, this week, let's knock out the TV world stuff. And by TV world stuff, I mean Game of Thrones came back this week, Walking Dead finale this week, and of course I love Shameless, which has nothing to do with anything, so Shameless is a good time. The American version, not the UK version. I haven't gotten that far, but I heard it's much better. Big surprise, right? Just like with The Office. So, Game of Thrones was pretty good. It jumped around a lot, but it tied up loose ends from last season, picked up right where it left off, basically, so that was cool. You didn't get a lot of everybody, you got a little bit of everybody. You know, they dabbled all over the place. Let's see, went into depth more with Daenerys. Showed her actually looking to buy an army. I think it's the army that she buys and then turns on the people that she bought it from. And if I'm right, I think she sells one of her dragons to get the army and then just takes it all back. So, looks at least they're loyal dragons, right? But there's a good thing that I saw online. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, there's a person out there that goes by the name of Comic Book Girl 19. She's on YouTube. She does a nice rundown of the of Daenerys' family. I think it's Targaryens or something like that. So if you want to know the history of them further back, we're talking, you know, thousands of years, and how they became into control and then lost power and all that good stuff, check out her YouTube video. Comic Book Girl 19 is her name. It's also on Facebook. And we're on Facebook. So if you're sitting on your computer watching this and you haven't gone to Facebook and searched Mind-Cemetery and just like our page, would you? We have almost got, 500? Can we get 500 today? I don't know. Is it too much to ask from 100,000, 200,000 listeners and downloads and all that other shenanigans? If just a couple percent of you could do that, that'd be great. That'd be cool. Oh, and follow us on Facebook as well. Same name, Mind Cemetery. We keep it simple around here. We're simple people. Well, I'm a simple person now. So, Game of Thrones is good. A little slow, probably, for some people, but, you know, they tied up a lot of loose ends. The Imp is getting screwed over by his dad, just like in the books. They're following the books a lot closer than, say, Walking Dead. And with that, I'd like to say that the Walking Dead finale was complete garbage. Absolute trash, in my opinion. They have taken a great series and thrown it in the toilet from what it could be. I understand there's some things you can't do on network TV, like shoot a woman holding a baby, you know, killing both of them. I understand that can't happen. You have to write around that. You probably can't even do that in a movie, for God's sakes. But you know, there's some things you should have done with that finale, like, I don't know, kill the governor. You know, something simple like that would have been nice. But instead, the 27 people you see that they promised to die were pretty much all Woodbury people that the governor killed. Yeah, spoiler alert. Martinez and the Bowman guy just kind of stand there and watch him. And I'm thinking, yeah, right about now, Martinez, you need to shoot this guy. Because you just saw him go nuts, and you're crapping yourself, too. No, he didn't do it. So the Bowman, Martinez, and governor are just four-wheeling it around in the wilds. They didn't go back to Woodbury, because all the people from Woodbury left and went to the prison now. So I don't understand. I don't understand what the hell they did. They barely introduced Tyree into the story, you know, just pure garbage. You know, they could have rewrote everything. Andrea dies, gets bitten by Milton, who turns. Her dialogue at the end was complete garbage, I thought. She kills herself. That was supposed to be the big, oh, you know, heartbreaking moment. You know, cue the sad song and the predictability. It's just unbelievable, you know. Just, you know, she took like half an episode to get out of some handcuffs when before, you know, she's like MacGyver over there with a hairpin. But, yeah, so kind of sucked, but it just, you know, when she was going, she didn't, you know, there wasn't anything cool that was said, like, you know, you know, I finally get out of this hellhole, you know, get to see my sister, you know, there was none of that kind. Where's the governor? You know, did you kill the governor, Rick? You know, nothing like that, you know, was said, and nobody's saying anything, but whatever. The Karen woman that survived that massacre is the one in the comics that shoots the governor. I believe so. Because I think she ends up, like, shooting his wife and the baby, and then shoots the governor or something stupid. It's weird, but I can't remember it fully, but the assault on the prison was nothing like what the comic books said it was going to be. It was a joke. Absolute joke. So, oh, and Carl's a pure psychopath now. He's a, like, natural-born killer psychopath, if you ever seen that movie. You know, so kid runs up on him. Yeah, you know what, to his credit, though, he did tell him to drop the gun. You know? I got a gun pointed at your head. I'm telling you to drop it. What's to think about, right? I'm just going to drop it. You're right. Yes, whatever you say. Oh, 91 likes. Thanks, Ian. Moving on up in the world. Get out of the way, George Jefferson. I'm moving in. Quite possibly. Literally. This is in the chat room. If you're not in our chat room, go to Pal Talk. Find the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. Jump in the chat room. Have conversations with some 15, 20 of your closest online friends. I don't know. I can't count right now. 4 or 5. Yeah. 20-some. Let's just... How about 50? Yeah. Let's just call it an even 50. Let's round up. And talk to the other people listening and get their opinions. I don't know. What did you guys think of the show? If you think I'm ragingly wrong, call up and call me an idiot. 504-273-7379. It's been done before. So, you know, I just thought it was a lame ending, and a lot of people on Twitter also did, so I'm glad I wasn't the only one. And some of my friends were like, oh, it was awesome. I'm like, you're an idiot. It sucked. You know, there's a lot of build-up for nothing. This whole assault on the prison was built up for nothing, you know, just stupid. But, so, there's those two shows that were on this weekend. At least Walking Dead's gone, and Game of Thrones is here, and Mad Men will be here next week to wash the nasty taste of that horrible writing, and hopefully everybody can remove their lips from the rectums of Greg Nicotero and the other writers and all that stuff from Walking Dead for a few minutes and kind of slap them in the face and say, do better. You know, that's all you need to do. It's that simple. Stop resting on your laurels, you know, and do something with this show. Whole season of sitting in the prison doing nothing. I'm very upset over it. Very upset over a TV show. It's like my friend earlier told me. He's like, you know what, don't let, you know, logic get in the way of a good TV show. I said, you know what, you're right. I kind of ruin it with thinking. Just show up and watch the The shiny box idiot. Yeah, that's true. Falling Skies is coming. Hopefully they won't trash that either. So, yeah, I don't know when Falling Skies is coming, Gamer. But, that I did like that series, of course. So hopefully that'll come back here soon. So the other TV thing that I was going to talk about was the NCAA tournament here. And I'm sure I've got, 50,000 people turning the channel now that I'm talking sports. But anyway, there was this little thing called the NCAA tournament this weekend where they play basketball. They put a ball through a hole, do it a bunch of times and you win. So, old Indian game, evidently. So, a guy by the name of Kevin Ware plays for Louisville. Broke his leg in the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. It basically, if you take your leg below your knee and send it, 90-degree angle, just snap it, and then let it dangle. That's pretty much what it looked like. And it didn't look like he did anything extraordinary to make this happen, right? First of all, the guy's a basketball player. He's not like 400 pounds with pelican legs, He jumps to try to, block a shot, comes down, and the leg snaps like a twig, and he goes down, and, people are crying, and it, just completely gruesome right there. You got, crisis situation for this team, Coach is crying, everybody's like, holy crap, what did I just see? I'm surprised people weren't throwing up. It was ridiculous. They wouldn't show it, again, in replays. I had to go to YouTube, so just, Google Kevin Ware and check that rubbery leg that he has. And my question for him is, and I hope it's not something that people would consider cruel or unusual, but has the guy ever heard of milk? I mean, as a basketball player, you're going to be jumping up and down a lot. How does it break like that? How does your leg just snap like it's a toothpick? I mean, he's a skinny guy, but calcium, maybe, in your diet? Because I've never seen anything like that before. It's not like you got hammered by Lawrence Taylor. People are like, oh, it looked like Joe Theismann's leg break. I was like, yeah, well, at least LT hit him. At least a truck hit him. This guy just kind of jumped in the air and landed and snapped. And it's like, whoa. So that check that out if you want to get your daily dose of gruesome. That's for sure. So, and the last bit of news, I had been looking for a paper that I wrote way back in 1995, senior year of high school, right? And I did it on UFOs. And I found, right, and I asked people on the Facebook page, I said, hey, when I find this paper, do you want me to post it? Do you want me to take pictures so you guys can read it? Red ink and everything. So, as you know, I'm not the best with grammar and or spelling. So, there's plenty of red ink here for everyone to laugh at. A 17-year-old me trying to write a paper about aliens. So, and I thought it was gone, but I've got an actual hard copy, and it's in pristine condition, by the way. It's amazing. But it's called The Alien Investigation. Interesting. So I was looking at it, I was like, the first thing I wanted to look at was who the hell did I cite for this thing? So I'm looking at it. I remembered some Mysteries of the Unknown Time Life books I was citing, right, at the time. I remembered those, but I didn't remember the rest of them, right? So some of them here, some names you might know, and now that I read it, there's Jacobs, of course. I know a lot of people have bashed him for his underwear shenanigans with the Emma, I forget her last name, shenanigans that he pulled, but this is pre-pervert David Jacobs, so that's my defense, What the book is, the UFO controversy in America. It's one out in 1975, so yikes. Richard Jerome, let's see, A Saucer Scorned. Interesting. From 1994. It was a fairly new book right there then. Gordon Lohr, John E. Mack, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, and John Spencer. So, there's some names I recognize, some names I don't. But it's interesting to see. That was the first thing I did. I was like, I gotta go check my citations and see who I actually quoted or used for this paper. So it's not too bad. It could have been a lot worse, let's face it. But overall, let's see. As Nicole put it, this summarizes my life. The grade I got on it. Content A, mechanics C plus B minus. Great content and executed poorly. Classic me, by the way. So that's that little bit. So on that note, if Mike is still here and not asleep, I know he had some coffee, so he should be raring to go, which is good because I think I'm a little sick from eating too much candy from my kids. Eating my kids' candy is what I'm doing. So, Micah, you there?
I actually had to take a nap. No, I'm kidding.
I don't doubt it.
Just kidding you.
No, that's all right.
I'm here indeed. I was enjoying listening to the news. I'm getting my news roundup here. And, what was up with the guy and the basketball incident? I mean, that was totally bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, didn't you think the same thing? Like, how in the hell are you that brittle?
When I was in high school, I remember there was an incident that occurred, which after listeners of your program hear this, they will forever know this as the incident. And what happened was there was a guy who was out playing basketball, and he went to do a jump shot and came back down and broke his leg. Now, it wasn't as gruesome, as gory as what we've been talking about tonight, but I remember there was this really science-y guy who was in school, and he was always the guy who would question the absurdities that seemed to crop up in our daily existence. And he said, so you mean to tell me that you leapt up into the air, of your own power, gravity brought you back down, and that was enough crushing force to break your foot or your leg? It's strange, but apparently it happens, and it's happened more than once. If you just get just the right angle, your leg snaps and your bone pops out and there's blood everywhere. It's just terrible. So, physics, my friend.
Yeah, that's how they were breaking it down. They're like, he came down with 2,500 pounds of pressure, and he probably had a stress fracture and all this. I was like, God, I hope so. I hope something like that happened, because otherwise you are just really brittle. For
sake, we hope so. And it very well may be that there is some sort of an underlying condition, maybe a calcium deficiency or something that was, just enough to cause, a weakness in the bones. I mean, I'm no sports doctor or anything like that. I actually used to, when I worked in radio, I used to do commercials and announcing for a couple of doctors of sports medicine, and so I did hear a lot of talk about this sort of thing, from my years in talk radio, but I'm certainly no expert. Nonetheless, there has to be some underlying condition there, and as with all things, including some of the stranger things we'll be talking about tonight, Chip, I have a strong sense that there is a scientific explanation underlying that it's perhaps not quite the anomaly that people would think it to be, but it is certainly uncommon and, if anything, a bit unsettling.
So I don't know why I'm feedback right now, but let's see if we can see if we get Joe on that. There we go. Anyway, speaking of doing radio stuff, you have your own podcast there, The Gralien Report, that is insanely popular, and on there you do a little bit of daily news stuff yourself, so everybody can go there and check it out. It's thegralienreport.com, just GRALIEN report.com, nice and easy. How long have you been at The Gralien Report?
Oh, I launched the Gralien Report in January. What was the year? It's been 5 years. This is our 5th year now. I say our because, it started as a lone effort, by me, myself, and I. And, now I've got a few helpful hands. The ever enigmatic Red Pill Junkie, who he's kind of known throughout the blog sphere as being an escapist and somewhat reclusive, although, I met Red Pill Junkie, who blogs for DailyGrail.com and IntrepidMagazine.com, one of my other endeavors. and also MysteriousUniverse.com. RPJ actually came to the event that I co-host in Minneapolis, Minnesota with Scotty Roberts every October called the Paradigm Symposium. And so we actually got to meet face-to-face, had breakfast and coffee together a couple of times, and we hope to be able to catch up more often. I think it's important. So many of us stay connected via Skype and through email and Facebook and social networking, Twitter. It is important every now and then just to get face-to-face with people. And I'll tell you this, if you don't mind me throwing a very quick plug in right off the bat and then getting it out of the way, that's, as I've come to find out, probably the most important factor when it comes to really launching, a successful endeavor, whether it be something like Gralien Report. I have to rely on people who are willing to, present their contributions, whether it be through an email or a story lead or something like that. We do a lot of crowdsourcing at the Gralien. Therefore, when Scotty Roberts and I, who do the Paradigm Symposium, and of course Scotty is the publisher and founder of Intrepid Magazine, when we started really getting serious about Intrepid Magazine and wanting to do a good news source, the official magazine, if you will, of the Gralien Report. Of course, Scotty brought me in later after the fact, but it's such a nice compliment to the Gralien Report. And of course, we do the show as the official podcast of Intrepid Magazine now, and both of those ventures under Paradigm Symposium and whatnot. But when we decided we wanted to get serious and start doing a really, really, critical look at the world of the strange, the unusual, ancient history, politics, UFOs, all this sort of stuff, and look at it from a very unconventional approach, to look at things in a way that really is kind of, I guess alternative really is the best word for it, good alternative media. We took the same approach. We looked to people who have been friends, fellow supporters, fellow researchers, and so we've launched an Indiegogo, a crowdfunding effort, to really try and get people more involved in a way that, is meaning towards, if you'd like to help us get this thing going, take a look at intrepidmag.com and see if it's something that's worthwhile to you, and think about, helping us make this something that you're going to find on every newsstand in all your stores, and of course, a real voice for alternative news that approaches this stuff seriously, and at times also scientifically. So that's the beautiful thing about doing, whether it be a magazine like Intrepid Magazine or Gralien Report. I've been doing this stuff for 5 years, and to answer your question, it's fun. It's something that is a labor of love most of the time, but thank God that there are people out there who will get involved, and at times even throw dollars, if not just an email or a news tip behind this stuff. And Chip, that's what's so damned fascinating to me about it all, is that you hear so many good stories and you meet so many gracious people. And of course, what we give back, of course, is at websites like Gralien Report. You get to hear these fantastic stories that people relate and all these things. And so I certainly encourage people to go to GralienReport.com, check it out. In the right-hand column, they'll actually see a link to the Indiegogo campaign that I'm doing right now with Intrepid. And, there's so many who get involved, but hey, I'm just happy to hear from people. And again, that's kind of what makes the little world go around, is keeping this thing going by crowdsourcing people's brilliance. I wish I could take credit for all of it myself,
I hear you. And that's the entire point of, coming on other shows and getting into new listener bases and stuff, because who knows, some of my people may not have, or my listeners may not have even heard of you before. So
yeah,
I got no problem with having people on and getting them out there to know about all their endeavors, whether it be Intrepid Mag, your podcast, the website, Gralien Report, podcast, Gralien Report, or anything that you're doing out there, that's by all means, that's what you're here to do, man. That's, that's part of it,
Yeah.
Whatever. Tossing that. I'll make you do it a couple more times tonight for 6.
Well, I appreciate that, Chip, very much. It's a fantastic thing that you and Joe and all the guys over here at the network, have been friends with Joe Montaldo for a long time. A lot of the other hosts on this network, and that's what's beautiful. When you say network, a lot of people look at that as being the flashy, oh my gosh, we've got this syndicated, means of bringing media to people. The reason it's called a network is it's people coming together and working together, and again, that's absolutely what I'm trying to do with Intrepid Magazine and with the Gralien Report right now. My pal Scotty Roberts and I, we're trying to get people to come together and say, hey, have you ever looked at history and said, maybe what the history books that we are made to read in school, maybe that's not the entire story? Or have you ever looked at what you see in politics every single day and said, maybe this isn't exactly what's going on as written or as we see by the talking heads on all the mainstream major media networks. I try not to be a complete, overt, outright conspiracy theorist. But, I mean, a great example yesterday, it's been a hot social issue right now about gay marriage in the United States. And meanwhile, and not to detract from the importance of an issue like that, but yesterday, the less reported information, of course, had the signing of a spending bill, House Resolution 933, that contained what's called the Farmer Assurance Provision. But, people who aren't supportive of it call it the Monsanto Protection Act. And a lot of people are really concerned about not just the agriculture industry, but, literally what some append, conspiracy theories to with regard to the genetic manipulation of foods, and how that food is produced and where that food is produced and how it is, actually brought to the public and sold, what people are actually putting into their bodies. There's so many important questions, and time again, I notice that you'll see someone will come on television and they'll make a big statement. There'll be something, whether it be a birth certificate, that our president releases in conjunction with, the first actual press release given by the Federal Reserve in history ever. There's so much that goes on in the world of politics, just as well as in the conventional approach to history, and just as well in terms of conventional approaches to science. And I think that it's important to question everything that we see around us, and that's why alternative media is important. And where else are you going to get that information than from people who are willing to come forward and tell their own experiences, share their own perspectives, and literally, as the word is used, network with one another. It's important what you guys do, and of course what we're all trying to do together. So it's really just absolutely a joy and a pleasure to be able to come on programs like this and to talk about these sorts of things and get people to think a little bit, broader and a little bit beyond what they read, in their newspaper and see on television each day.
And that's the name of the game right there. And it's hard to do for a lot of individuals to think outside the box, so to speak. I work in law enforcement here over in Raleigh, and a lot of people look at me like my head's on backwards when I start talking about what show I do and what I talk about. But what happens when you get them alone, or I'll get a text here and there, them forwarding me a story. Hey, what do you think of this? I'm like, old hack, I've heard of that a long time ago, I forget which one it is, and my buddy was telling me. I'll try to find the thing right now. But, it's crazy at how many people come back at you later on, slowly but surely trickling to you.
Oh, yeah.
So if you, had that kind of experience of them start to lay their own stories, or, even some of them have called into the show here to talk about stuff.
Wow, how interesting. I do have that experience, Chip. And by the way, you mentioned Raleigh. I'm just a few hours away from there myself, here in the heart of Appalachia. But I'm sure you can't tell by my accent. and I actually did an interview earlier today with a couple of fine lads, J and K of J and K After Dark. And the first question they had is, my brother Caleb is actually presently one of the engineers on my program, the Gralien Report, and J and K asked, why do you have a Southern accent, but your brother doesn't? But coming back to your question, yeah, I've certainly had that happen where, it's a strange dichotomy when you have to do a professional work. I perform as a musician, mostly on the weekends as well. Been a guitarist for years. I really enjoy playing music, most of the time. And it's really kind of been a life's passion. And so when people come up to me at a wedding or, in a bar or something like that, and they say, what else do you do? If you want to turn heads, you tell them that you write books about UFOs. But yeah, sure enough, then those people, slowly but surely, they come back around. I'll get a friend request on Facebook or something like that, and they'll say, I neglected to mention this the other day, but I have a sister, or I have a friend, or I myself, maybe in some instances, had this thing happen years ago, and I never thought much about it until you mentioned what you do. And sure enough, you find out that maybe the majority of people you meet, better than 5 out of 10, have had some weird thing happen to them in their lives. But Chip, what they usually do, and maybe you've experienced this as well, people have a tendency when they experience these things to just say, well, that was strange, maybe a bit novel, and then they just kind of wipe their minds. They wipe their minds clear. There's a standing city councilman here in Asheville, and years ago, I won't mention his name here on the radio, but he had told me actually, an associate and I had asked him if he'd ever had anything strange happen because we were interviewing him on the radio, and he had said, yeah, there was one thing that happened, and, you were kind of thinking, maybe he'd seen something, kind of ghostly or something. No, he'd been driving home with his partner, and she may have seen it first, but the two of them, they were driving along, and they saw a great big red glowing flying saucer hovering over the road. And they watched this thing for a number of minutes, and he said she and I went home, and we both wrote down in different rooms and wrote down our descriptions and sketches of what it was and tried to document it and all this, and and really, what else could you call it? I mean, we saw a flying saucer. But it's funny because, people like that, here's a standing, local politician who's had this incredible encounter. He's a very open-minded guy. He's not ashamed to talk about it. Obviously talked about it on the radio. And basically kind of summed it up as, yeah, we saw it. We wrote down so that we wouldn't forget what we saw, and then did nothing about it. People just kind of wipe this strange experience, from their minds after it happens, which is curious, and it causes me to wonder. People talk about deneuralizers, things like that, and although that's a tongue-in-cheek reference to the Men in Black films, a lot of, elements in with regard to ufology today do have to do with people claiming that they have an experience and then their memory is conveniently wiped clean and they don't recall what happened until after the fact, often with the aid of hypnosis, which I'm a little skeptical about that myself. I think you begun to touch on that a bit when you were talking to Gibbs in the Emma Woods situation, but there's so many aspects of that one, I think, really, if you look at it carefully, it begs a bit of skepticism. But by the same token, you can't deny that there is this pervasive element within ufology of people forgetting things. And I don't know that it's always that there's actually a technological element that is utilizing some sort of overt method of control or deneuralization, if you want to call it that, to borrow the popular term. I think it very well may be that sometimes the strange experiences that people have are so far removed from a person's general conception from day to day of what reality to them has come to mean and come to be, that I think at times people literally divorce themselves. Whether or not they do it consciously, I think more often than not, it's unconscious, but they divorce themselves from the strange experience because it doesn't fit into the matrix of what they know to be reality. And so after these incredible encounters, they may remember it vividly, they may even think about it and ponder it from time to time. But there, if you and I who would have an experience like that, and it would perhaps drive them to the brink of madness as they pursue it and try and understand it, as I often do with these sorts of things. And I'm not really an experiencer. I am very passionate about this, and I try and study it. I'm not an experiencer per se. And others who have that experience, they can very easily discount it and walk away from it. And I think at times it's almost a built-in autonomous kind of reaction to having a strange experience. The mind rejects it unconsciously in many instances so that they can cope with the full-on effect of experiencing the unnatural as we would perceive it. It's very strange, very, very strange.
Let me tell you, you are running 10,000 miles a minute here, and which is good, because you've hit on a lot of great topics there. But I want to try to go back a little bit and try to unravel it and bring us back to where we are.
Sure.
Let's see if I can do that. I wanted to talk about the GMO thing that you were talking about, Leo. And yeah, you're right. It was the big smoke screen with the gay marriage rights, and then all of a sudden you didn't hear, but 2 days later, oh, by the way, this passed in this bill. My thoughts on GMO foods, I'm torn, to be honest with you, because on one hand you have some people screaming about the dangers of frankenfood, as I like to call it, and on the other, I'm stuck. Absolutely, I don't know if I should call it stuck, but I do hold a guy by the name of Norman Borlaug in the highest regards of human beings on the planet, who basically is the man who started the whole GMO process with wheat and crops being able to be grown in the third world, mainly Africa, and my kind of point is that it seems like it's always first world rich people, or elitists, however you want to classify them, trying to tell the third world how to live, and scaring the piss out of people that could be dead next week or next month if they don't get some food, into saying, don't take these GMO crops, these GMO seeds that are designed to grow in your landscape, so you can live, because they're bad for you and it might give you cancer in 10, 15 years.
Right.
We don't have 10, 15 years, people, I understand that probably in the first world we can make choices on what foods we can eat and we can't eat, but there's humans on the planet that don't have a choice. So, get out of their way and let them decide what's good for them now, okay, before they start losing the population, because you're going to keep seeing them on TV, running into cycles of starvation and all that kind of thing. When there's a very old man out there who is still alive, named, I think he's still alive, Norman Borlaug, who did his damnedest to combat world hunger. And here it is, Hollywood stars telling you, don't eat that starving person. Come on, just stay out of there.
I like that. Don't eat the starving person. Actually, Chip, real quick, those are good points that you make, by the way. And it reminds me of something, and I'll just interject quickly here. What I'd said earlier, I don't know that there's necessarily always a conspiracy involved, and that sometimes there are natural elements that emerge from within anything that can lead to the assumption that there's something nefarious going on, kind of like with the brainwashing or the memory wiping, with UFO reports and things like that. With regard to genetically modified or engineered foods, I think that at times the intention behind genetically engineering crops for doing such things is not, I'm sure, one, I understand, and that's fine, and I accept and even welcome people differing with me on this point. But coming back to what you'd said, I think often there is a reason why there is an effort to be able to harness quicker methods of growing crops, and also methods that would allow the production of more food more quickly. Because in different parts of the world, see, in the United States, it's I hate to say, I know, but just the same, I think, Americans often have a guilt factor, and the reason why is because we do have a lot more in this country than in other parts of the world. I think we do take for granted the availability of food. I walked into a Chinese restaurant the other day. It's a buffet, and a pretty good one here in Asheville. And I had a friend visiting from out of town, and I noticed that there was a sign that they'd added to the wall that said, "This is an all-you-can-eat buffet, not an all-you-can-waste buffet." And man, in a restaurant like that, it's so easy to go in there and just put way too much food on you. Like, look at all this stuff, and you might eat, half of it. Some people might eat a third of it. And we do take for granted the availability of resources, not just food. Whereas in other parts of the world, famine, hunger, things like that, people literally, on what I make in a single month, in other parts of the world, people could live off of for, not just a year, maybe for a few years. And the scarcity of resources, food, and even something that we, is abundant and plentiful here is water. Those kinds of things aren't as available to people in other parts of the world. And so, sure, there's the humanitarian aspect that's emerging from all this, but I think that at times the intention behind genetic engineering and modification of, and thereby controlling the production and the efficiency of producing certain foods, it may not always be nefarious. Now, by the same token, once those technologies exist, almost inevitably, when you get special interests involved, and there are people who are trying to control and basically get their corner and angle of the market that allows them to control the production of certain kinds of resources, foods, whether it be food or water or anything like that, or maybe something like oil, utilized to power automobiles and all the different kinds of other transportation methods. These kinds of things will be controlled if people can get a corner on a market for it, and if they especially can work out legislation that allows them to do that. And this is where things become kind of tricky, because not only does it become politicized, but there is the potential for the misuse of technologies when that occurs. And then finally, the other thing too is that the longer reaching or the longer lasting repercussions of genetically modifying and engineering foods and things like that, maybe we haven't studied enough to understand fully how that would affect humans who consume that kind of food regularly. So while we're trying to address obvious problems that are of great importance in our world today, the shortcoming there, I suppose, is also that in addition to addressing the problem of scarcity and hunger in one part of the world, you may be contributing the declining of individual health elsewhere or everywhere. When these individuals utilize this resource that's been made more plentiful. So, it's a double-edged sword, but I don't think it's always necessarily a conspiracy, and I think that's kind of what you were saying as well.
Yeah, and that's the part where I'm torn with. It's like, yeah, they may be bad for us, but, some people ain't got time to wait for that study to come out,
It's true, though. It really is. It's a good point you make.
Time for that study to come out, or a Whole Foods to go to, so...
Yeah.
But yeah, you're talking about doing a lot of music. That's a good place to do, or to be a musician is out there in Asheville, man. That's a good downtown scene.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's a hippie renaissance here in Asheville. And, I don't, I try not to call myself anything. I'm certainly not a hippie, but I do enjoy art, music, culture, all these kinds of things. And, it's a wonderful town for stuff like that. And what's so funny is that, I travel around the Southeast and perform more elsewhere. I very seldom actually perform. There's like one or two locations in Asheville that I regularly perform. And I think the reason why is because it's harder to find work in Asheville. There are so many good musicians in a town like this. It's really oversaturated. And so I often end up traveling to other states, and I'm out of town a lot, performing. As a matter of fact, when I gave a lecture earlier this month at the International UFO Congress out in Phoenix, Arizona, they had initially asked if I could bring a guitar and do a performance one night as well. And unfortunately, the burden of carrying a great big acoustic Dreadnought Martin guitar along with me on my plane, literally, I would be better off either shipping the guitar out beforehand and taking a chance with that, or just putting the thing, in the seat next to me and literally buying another plane seat next to me when I travel. So, yeah, it's a little difficult sometimes to carry the guitar around with me to stuff like that. But, hey, that's the price of being in demand, right?
Yeah, it's bulky on a plane, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The article my buddy was trying to talk to me about was the Guy Huddle FBI release, and I was like, oh, heard that garbage a long time ago. Yeah, they say it's not about a UFO, right, yet we're wasting J. Edgar Hoover's time with it, right, Come on. But I was trying to tell him, he's like, well, I'm interested in the occupants in that crash. I say, yeah, well, if you're interested in the Roswell crash, I was like, you need to check out the Aztec crash there, because they kind of hinted at, what they're talking about there. And I think maybe... No, the Aztec crash happened before the Roswell one, I think. But I was like, yeah, they're talking like these radar knock down these UFOs. And I was like, yeah, that's what you need to be looking at. I was like, look up the Aztec UFO. So I don't know if he actually did, but, as I was talking about where people bring stuff up out of nowhere to me. Hey, have you heard of this? Of course I have, It's as basic as it gets, right?
Look at the way that the media has responded to the Guy Huddle story. As a matter of fact, I did do a brief write-up at the Gralien Report about that. But, so many authors, Nick Redfern and Stanton Friedman and others, have addressed that over the years. That memo was officially declassified, I believe, a few decades ago. And as long as the FBI website has had documents pertaining to UFOs, that document has been available on their website. Now, the official release in a section of the website dedicated to UFO reports and unexplained, someone pointed this out the other day, unexplained phenomenon. Very curiously, they have it worded in the singular rather than in the plural. If you actually, and I've, of course, visited all the major intelligence agency websites and looked for, declassified documentation about these kinds of things, which I would argue, by the way, Chip, that there's a startling number of serious researchers who don't do that, and they're probably the very jumping up and down talking about disclosure, damn it, we need disclosure. I think disclosure is kind of an ongoing process, and I always tell people, my friend Stephen Bassett had actually said, if you want proof of UFOs, just go to the internet. And I said, Steve, you got to be more specific than that. You've got to go to the FBI website, the NSA website, the CIA website, and also websites of intelligence agencies elsewhere in the world, because the Canadian government has released some really intriguing ones. There have, of course, been, releases in parts of South America. The English, have been releasing theirs. The British UFO files are also some very interesting ones, including reports of RAF fighters going after motherships bigger than a football field. All kinds of stuff. But with regard to this document that talked about the alleged crash of UFO objects in New Mexico and the recovery of bodies that Guy Huddle had apparently sent this memorandum to Hoover and whatnot. That document had been available even prior to the official UFO channel or unexplained phenomenon channel that the FBI put up, which also deals with phenomenon, crop circles, all this sort of stuff. And if anyone wants to go to the website, it's all there on the page. And in fact, I've got a link up to it somewhere on GrayLandReport.com. But that memorandum's been out for a long time. Now, what happens when the mainstream media gets a hold of it? They act like it's a news story. That's been out for years, and most of us who are involved in this kind of research, we've known about it for a long time.
Yeah, that's the killer of it is, the cycle that hits it, and it seems like every 6 months, maybe a year tops, it comes back around and they act like it's big news. And I remember, I think I wrote a blog about it a year or two ago when we first started, and I was like, oh, God, here we go again,
Yeah. And, these stories, being a blogger and a media, representative of this kind of information yourself, that there's a cyclical nature to a lot of this stuff. These stories, they'll tuck themselves away and they'll hide for a couple of years, and then they'll come back out, and then they're constantly, being kind of, reevaluated and regurgitated. Actually, might be a better word for it, And yeah. You use stuff. It's a constant attempt at trying to find information and finding something that's compelling that a listenership or a readership or something will want to study and read about. And I think the most important thing that we can draw from the Hoddle memorandum, because really in truth, it doesn't. A lot of people say, "Wait a minute, you mean to tell me that doesn't prove that there were UFOs that crashed in New Mexico?" Well, no, that memorandum alone doesn't prove it. It offers some compelling evidence. But even the FBI have pointed out, as Nick Redfern has written about and other researchers too, that the informants who had passed that information along very likely were involved in a hoax. And I think that what's important to look at is that even the FBI on their official blog, yes, the FBI has a blog, and yes, they've written about this, they even mentioned that we don't have information in our files about it, but there have been some suggestions made by civilian researchers that this memorandum was not in itself a hoax, but that the sources for that data had been maybe they'd taken some liberty with the facts. And so that's something that's also been well known for a number of years. I don't even know all the ins and outs about it. Again, there are other writers who've done a much better job categorizing and collecting information about that story and that incident. But the memo itself, I don't think it proves that there were crash landings of UFOs, but what it does show, and this is perhaps the most important thing, the FBI has announced that is the most popular and most viewed document that they have hosted on their servers. And so that shows that while these subjects like UFOs continue to be water cooler subject matter, they are also nonetheless a matter of intense debate and interest among the American populace, and no doubt other groups and cultures and demographics worldwide. Obviously, UFOs are something that people take very seriously, and even if it's merely a passing interest that they have in the subject, they take it seriously enough to go to the actual intelligence agencies that have collected this data for the last several decades and look at declassified government files to try and find answers. And so, in that sense, there is importance to the memorandum, importance to the fact that intelligence agencies have been collecting data about UFOs, and there certainly is importance to whether or not disclosure is something that we will ever attain or if it is ongoing. I, of course, adhere to the latter perspective. I think that it's something that's been a slow process, and we're seeing bit by bit disclosure right now. And what all the documents seem to point to right now is that while there's been official acknowledgement of ufological, what would you call them, anomalies that have been reported and recorded and studied by intelligence agencies, these agencies don't appear to be releasing information that indicates that there is a general consensus or a body of knowledge as to what exactly, without question, this phenomenon actually is. It seems to still be up in the air, and this is also verified by the likes of Colonel John Alexander and others who have actually worked in government and said it seems that these people, at times, if they're not even interested in UFOs, at very least they don't seem to have any more answers than the civilian researchers, which is a really compelling statement if you ask me.
That it is, and you mentioned someone that I find very interesting with Alexander there, but we are at the top of the hour. Need to take a break real quick. You can find Micah Hanks online at theGrayLandReport.com, IntrepidMagazine.com, right?
It's intrepidmag.com, but yeah, close enough.
Good enough for the government work, no? And you can check out his newest book that we're going to be talking about next hour, I swear to God, The UFO Singularity, on Amazon. And we will be back here in about 8 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark. So we're going to take our break, and Joe can go ahead and take us away, and we will be back.
Some nights I stay up, cashing in my palace.
Hey everybody, this is Jill Marie Morris from Perspective X. If you've been searching for a variety talk radio show with an edge, then look no further. Join my co-host Stephanie Benetti and I as we get down and dirty discussing the latest hot topics and relevant newsworthy stories. Informative, engaging, and quite often controversial, Perspective X is a unique blend of insight, opinion, and wit. So tune in and listen every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. on UPRN 107.9 FM New Orleans. It's not just an opinion, it's our perspective. Perspective X.
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Hello, everyone. I'm psychic medium.
Hi, everybody. This is Erica Getch. I hope to see you on Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific on the Galactic Connection, keeping you connected 1 hour at a time. For more info, please visit thegalacticconnection.com.
You are listening to UPRN 107.9 New Orleans.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we co-host a new show called News on the Flip Side. You can catch us every Saturday night, 8 p.m. Central, where we will be discussing current events and topics going on in the world today. We have opinions on everything. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, News on the Flip Side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome back to hour number 2 of the Mind Cemetery with your host, Chip and Nicole. The phone lines are open, and the number is 504-273-7379. Welcome back to hour number 2 of the Mind Cemetery with your host, Chip and Nicole. The phone lines are open, and the number is 504-273-7379. You can join the discussion in UFO Paranormal Radio Network's Pal Talk chat room with our guests, the hosts, or give any feedback you'd like. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Visit our website, Mind-Cemetery.com, for upcoming show news and blogs.
Number 2 with Micah Hanks from the Gralien Report. That's GralienReport.com. You can also check out the Gralien Report podcast at GralienReport.com. You can check out his magazine with Scotty Roberts, IntrepidMag.com. And you can find his book, which we'll find talking about, The UFO Singularity, on Amazon, where you can find everything else that you need for your life. So, go there and find it. I'll put links up for it later and all that good stuff. Mike, can you get the book anywhere else? Do you have, off Gralien Report or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the UFO Singularity and also my other titles, Magic, Mysticism, The Molecule, and a few other anthologies and things that I've contributed to. You can find all of them at Gralien Report. If you go to the website there in the toolbar at the top of the page, you'll see bookstore. And in terms of getting my weekly show, the audio podcast button will take you there just as well. So everything can be found there at the site. If you're old-fashioned and you want to go to Barnes & Noble or to a bookstore and just grab it, it's available in stores everywhere just as well. But like you said, I think everybody pretty much satisfies all their needs by purchasing from Amazon or someplace else on the Internet, so you can find it everywhere.
Yeah, less human interaction, the better, really.
Right.
So, is it on Kindle?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, all my books, as far as I know, are available on Kindle, and at least if not just on Kindle, on several other reading devices, Nooks and things like that. Every nook and cranny, if you will. So,
I love Nooks and Crannies, and the Kindle is like for the super interaction challenged individual there.
Yeah.
Online.
Yeah. And I'll just say this, I love the Kindle if you're a writer and a researcher, because you can download a book, get it, and you don't have to wait for it to arrive in the mail. So if you're trying to get some information quickly, boom, there it is.
I'm Kate style. Snail mail me.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were talking at the break about UFOs, which, we're going to get to the whole reason you're even here instead of lollygagging around the first hour, shooting the breeze. We'll get to easing into the whole UFO topic here. And I was talking to you about how last night on Coast to Coast with George Knapp, we heard, or I heard, and probably, a couple million other people heard, Robert Bigelow appearance on the show. And how he is, sucking up more government contracts about building his, he actually has a contract now to attach one of those inflatable pods to the International Space Station. He was talking about that, and he was talking about actually putting these things on the moon and how we got to get there before China, and if we can get there before China, then we can research how to get to Mars, and, just the domino effect of space exploration, basically. Now we got to get there. And we were talking about how the privatization of space, basically, now, that's completely happened. If anybody knows anything about Bigelow, Knapp defends him, as he probably should, because he's, written the Skinwalk book, and, he pretty much has exclusive conversations with him. I've never heard Robert Bigelow come on any other shows or podcasts or anything like that. He's a very elusive person, and, I wasn't aware of any personal UFO experience or sightings or anything like that he had until, Micah brought it up, but that's interesting that helps fuel everything. But George Knapp last night kind of tried to praise everyone that questions his dealings with MUFON, which I think when I first started the whole thing on Blog Talk Radio, I did a big thing on. That's when all this was popping off, where everybody was finding out that you donated, he paid nearly $300,000. I think it was like $270,000 to him to get exclusive rights to all their archives and their records, and ended up developing, special teams where they'd respond before the STAR team responds for MUFON to sites, and it led to a lot, James Carrion leaving. It led to a lot of state directors leaving, a lot of members leaving. I know it had something to do with Elaine Douglas and Chase Kletsky leaving MUFON, and there was a mass exodus there for a while, and it gutted them because, they didn't care for the fact that this guy held the keys to the castle, basically. And to date, he hasn't released any information about what he's collected. Now, fast forward to, a little more current events, he has an exclusive contract with the Air Force that, all the reports of sightings go straight to him in his vault somewhere, where, shouldn't that be public property? That's something that, all are called in and said, hey, how can I get that information, Bob? Dare anyone ask that live on the air, I guess.
Or if those individuals did call in, the call screeners for George Knapp may not have allowed those individuals to ask those questions. That's always a possibility, too.
We didn't have time for you, sorry. I called in with him when he had Melba Ketchum on, and a long time, not like the second time maybe. First time she wasn't on for that long, but the second time she was talking about how people were trying to steal her idea for a documentary and all this stuff, and people releasing information, and I got on there and I was like, you know what? And I kind of took a pass angle on him too, and I got up at the Bigelow angle. I was like, you know what, Melba, you're playing this, you know who Melba Ketchum is, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've followed her work very closely over the last few months.
you come out here and you say certain individuals have released information against your, your wishes and all that kind of stuff, and they're stealing ideas. I was like, why don't you put your names out there? Throw their names out there so everybody knows who the shady characters are in the field. So in the future, when someone says, hey, I got a Bigfoot body here, they don't dump it on their doorstep, and then it ends up in La La Land, wherever the hell it goes, wherever the hell a Bigfoot body goes, I guess. But she's like, no, I don't want to, do that. I'm going to take the high road and all that. I'm like, all right, well, whatever, So then I was like, then, they talk about how she had problems getting peer review, right? And I was like, hey, George, aren't there some Bigelow scientists you can hook her up with? And zing that in there. He's like, well, thanks, Chip, and maybe he already has. And I was like, oh, hell, So, yeah, I tried to get a little Bigelow zing in there on him while I was on the air. So
good for you.
It's all about to do it. For God's sake, 6 million listeners. Can't anyone connect the dots, and slide in there with something? But yeah, he was pretty dismissive of that. But I'm just astonished at the contract getting to privatize space and contract to put one of those inflatable, units next to the International Space Station, and wants to get on the moon first, and it's just funny to me how we've trashed NASA and privatized it all, and now all of a sudden he's the man with the keys to the vault to everything, it seems. And he even said it yesterday. He's like, oh, I've dropped about $250 million on research and all this stuff, and nobody's done the research I have. Well, no one's had access to the information you've had either. Isn't that funny how that works?
Yeah, it is. And I think, one of the fundamental truisms that emerges here with regard to Robert Bigelow and his, interest in whether it be private, endeavors to occupy space, whether it be a lunar base or whether it be, his private interest in ufology, which, as we know and you've already pointed out very clearly, he keeps very private unto himself. It shows that money talks. And Bob Bigelow, I don't know, again, that necessarily there's a nefarious attitude, kind of a scheming going on behind the scenes, but it's troublesome when people, I think that the general trend these days, whether or not people actually put it into effect, the general trend is that people want transparency. I read an interview with Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia, in Wired magazine this month. And Jimmy was saying that, Wikipedia was both the smartest and the dumbest thing that ever happened to him because, he really was able to put information out to people and do so freely and in a way that was kind of, self-propelling. People contribute to the Wikipedia articles, and I know for a long time people used to refer to Wikipedia as being the cesspool of the Internet because you wouldn't know whether the information you found on Wikipedia is reliable or not. And in some instances that is still the case, but the way that Wikipedia is managed and the scrutiny that is applied to the subject matter that appears on Wikipedia, in I would say probably at least the majority of instances, seems to be one that very quickly separates the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and good information is held, and kept to highest priority. There'll be instances where certain information may be contributed by an individual and it's not modified quickly enough by, one of the whatever they call themselves, the editors, the controllers, the manipulators, the puppet masters at Wikipedia. But the thing is that the idea there is that people would contribute knowledge and information, and then that would be kind of edited, if you will, so that quality information would be what would remain lasting. And Jimmy Wales said that was good because, it really aids in getting information out and doing so in a way that, promotes transparency. But because I didn't, make it for profit, Wikipedia is also the dumbest thing I've ever done because I could have made, untold millions of dollars. It's the 6th most popular website on the web right now. And, so, the general trend seems to be that people want transparency, and private individuals and enterprises certainly can disseminate information. We don't have to rely entirely on government to do it. So I don't know that there's anything nefarious about Bob Bigelow and his interest. And as I'd said, I can't remember if it was in an article that I read years ago or someone had told me, but I seem to, recall, and I know someone had told me that he had had a UFO encounter himself, which is what propelled his interest in ufology. And the problem with what Bob does and how he does it is that he is going about this in a way where he's collecting information, and it's generally withheld. We don't know what the information that he's collecting is being used for, or who it's being collected and given to. We don't know if there are if Bigelow Aerospace has their own archive of UFO reports and investigations and things that Bob has personal interest in. Or if Bob is in the business of trying to collect that information for purposes of building his own damn saucer. Who knows? And that's the problem, is that every individual, I guess, if they've got the money and they've got the will to do it, they should have the right to be able to go out and do whatever the hell they want to. But, when there's a lack of transparency, the populace at large tends to have a problem with that. And that's why I think Bob Bigelow has become such a controversial character, because whatever he's doing, he's keeping it under wraps. And you're gonna find out more about what the government has to do with UFOs than you'll find out with what Bob Bigelow has to do with them.
That's true. There's no Disclosure Act for Bob Bigelow.
Yeah, and because he's a private individual, do you think that he is held accountable for any information that he may be keeping from the populace? Hell no. No, it's his. He can do his.
He's not even selling camp trips to Skinwalker Ranch, for God's sakes. I keep hearing all these Bigfoot hunts in Tennessee and Kentucky and all this stuff. Man, how about a Skinwalker Ranch weekend, for God's sakes? People would pay big bucks for that.
Well, and Chip, we could speculate here, and this is entirely just speculation, and whimsical at best, but we could speculate that it had been someone's intention all along to hand UFO reports and Skinwalker Ranch and whatever else to Bob Bigelow, because as a private individual fielding reports and actually literally obtaining properties where high strangeness tends to occur, it gets it out of the government's jurisdiction, and therefore they don't have to answer. There's no Freedom of Information Act request that can be filed for Bob Bigelow to have to provide information, because he's a private entity, and he's got his own enterprises and things like that. So one could argue that the privatization of space programs and ufology can also lead to less transparency in those instances. And I think it's very curious that an individual like Bigelow, in addition to being a private entity, who is able to be awarded contracts working with the space program, and obviously, has agreements with agencies like the Air Force with regard to UFO reports and things like that. That's very interesting that he is, of course, the person who's fielding UFO investigations and reports and the like, because, again, that removes any accountability that an official government agency would have in terms of releasing information about those kinds of interests. Very curious to me.
It's a new level of plausible deniability.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just speculating, but I mean, come on. Tell me that's not exactly how it is.
It's what we do best, right? So let's do it here. And let's put the training wheels on this sucker, and then we'll blow the doors off of it later. What are you talking about when you talk about UFO singularity in your book, The UFO Singularity?
Well, we could tie this in with what we've been talking about with regard to the privatization of space exploration. I think it'll make a good segue, since we're talking about easing the listener into the concept, and it is a bit of a broad and far-reaching concept that I'm expressing with the book, The UFO Singularity. And it primarily has to do with looking to the future, and also the future-bound technologies that may be, the beginnings of these sorts of technologies are available to us today, how these things might be applied to the study of UFOs. When we have an individual like Bob Bigelow, and we have a private individual who is involved in very innovative research and private interest in UFOs and the like, and there is no level of accountability that is appended to an individual like that, or at least if there is any, there's very little. What we have there is we have an instance where there could be technologies that are being produced largely in secret, and there would be no, way to really obtain disclosure, because it's something that is being contracted, away from. Whether or not government bodies are asking Bigelow, go build us a flying saucer, and he's going and doing it, then when we ask the government if they have one, they can say no. I think that happens from time to time, but by the same token, we've also got a private individual that, maybe just for his own personal interests, maybe he's, as many articles that have been written about him over the years, including one Forbes magazine, have said, he's personally interested in the paranormal. If that's really his driving force, nonetheless, it still removes this accountability, as we've already stated. Now, what does that have to do with ufology, and, of course, how technology today may be applied to studying these sorts of things? In the UFO singularity, what my primary argument is that there are technologies existing on Earth today that are trending toward a technology of tomorrow. A lot of it has to do with artificial intelligence, and I think that this technology of tomorrow, to use kind of a broad term for it, will probably, within the next 2 decades, really bring us to a new level of understanding when it comes to UFOs. And so, rather than looking at case histories and reports dating back to 1947 or so, in the golden era of flying saucers as it was, and rehashing those reports, I do look actually back to the war years, and we do in one of the chapters, we actually do get into a brief history of ufology from World War II to the present for purposes of looking at how technology has progressed since that time period. But as opposed to making that the entire focus of the book, with the UFO singularity, I look at the concept of technological singularity, defined by the Singularity Institute as being the creation of smarter-than-human intelligence. Obviously, again, this is artificial intelligence or synthetic, modified, perhaps, human intelligence. Human intelligence that's fitted with, workings or there's some sort of other synthetic technologies that enhance the natural levels of human intelligence. Once we get to that point, I argue in this book that not only will these sorts of technologies allow us to perhaps mimic a lot of things that we would call high strangeness, paranormal, unexplained, and UFO by today's standards, but I think also that it will enhance human levels of perception in such a way that certain existent technologies that baffle us, but that may be right here in our midst today, will begin to make more sense, because on a perceptual level, we will not only be looking at physicality, we'll be looking at space and time very differently just as well. And in a nutshell, that's really what I look at with the UFO singularity, and I think that there's a strong case that can be made that there are certain technologies on Earth today that constitute a lot of UFO sightings. But again, that very well may be, in certain circumstances, government technologies that are kept very, quiet and secretive. Or in other instances, this could also be private enterprises that, like Bob Bigelow and others, who I'm not saying again that he's building a flying saucer, but it may be that there are private wealthy individuals who may be making innovations today in certain areas of science that tomorrow will be applied to saucer-like technologies. And it's funny because I had a conversation when I was at the UFO Congress with Robert Schaefer, a well-known skeptic and a debunker. Schaefer and he called me glib on his blog and was kind of nasty the way he wrote about me. But once I introduced myself to him and we talked, we actually got along really well. And it was funny because something that he said to me, Chip, was that he kind of looked at me and he says, "You really think that there are government agencies that are building these things?" And I said, well, maybe not building flying saucers, but I would argue that a lot of UFO reports have to do with secret technologies that, organizations in officialdom are probably producing. I said, do you not think so? And he says, no, not at all, because he says if that were really the case, that information would be declassified and we'd know about it by now. There are plenty of instances where information has been withheld for security reasons from the public, and frankly, that a skeptic would come forward and say he doesn't think that government has anything to do with creating aerospaces that might be quote-unquote UFOs, unidentified flying objects, that at least civilian populace doesn't know about presently. It's funny that a skeptic would look at a completely skeptical argument to be made about ufology and say, no, I don't think that's what's going on. And so I asked Robert, I said, well, then let me ask you this. If you don't think that government's involved in some of this, does that mean you think that some of these UFOs are actually unexplained, anomalous phenomenon, perhaps extraterrestrial or something like that? And he says, no, not at all. And I said, well, what do you think, Robert? He says, I think people just lie. And so I joked with him. I said, we should start a blog called The Lying Saucer. And then he kind of laughed and said, we'd be sued if we did that. But the point is it's like, certain skeptics get to a point where they are literally just denialists. If it doesn't meet the criteria for what they, believe or disbelieve, they just outright dismiss it. And, I have respect for, skeptical researchers as well as the more open-minded ones. But when someone like Schaefer and I, just talking about this, he's willing to dismiss all reports of UFOs and the possibility that certain existent technology on Earth might account for some UFO sightings on the grounds that people just lie and make stuff up. Really? Does that explain 6 decades or more of official inquiry into these phenomena as recorded by the documents released by the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and other official agencies around the world? I just don't think so. I think that there's more to it than people just lying.
It has to be. And, then you just jogged my memory about another point earlier that you brought up, and that's the whole skeptic versus denialist. And that is something that Nicole started out, as a skeptic, but eventually it's evolved to being a denialist. And if you're a denialist about everything, because we've been on, quote-unquote ghost hunts and all that stuff, I don't know, paranormal investigations, I guess that's the PC word for it or the technical word. People don't get all crazy, but, you, me, and a couple other, 1,000 hillbillies, we'll just call it ghost hunting,
Yeah.
Squatching, but...
Squatching. I love that, yeah.
So we're in the same room, and we both hear the same things happening, and it's just, the wind could have done that, and the house shifted. I'm like, are you insane? But that's the point when we realized that it was just straight up the power of denial, because it would mean an absolute shift in your thought process as a whole and how you view the world. And then it would mean, then basically it means that there's things you can explain and things are out of your control, and it's time to go crawl up in a ball. And that, I think, is where a lot of the denialism comes from, is that people are so entrenched in the day-to-day lifestyle that you can't think outside the box, because it just will shatter their views on reality. So, I mean, that's pretty much where it evolves to, or I guess devolves to denialist.
Oh, yeah. And I'll just briefly say that, on Twitter earlier today, my friend Sharon Hill from Doubtful News tweeted at me and a couple of others and said, I am skeptical of your skepticism, and she says that jokingly. I mean, I think, I've at various times called myself a skeptic, and really it began to get uncomfortable when I was on stage at the International UFO Congress participating in a panel discussion, and because on my website I actually called myself a skeptic. And again, in large part I am a skeptic, but I'm not a person who's going out there with the preconception of disbelief, and I'm just trying to find ways to explain away everything. Look, I don't know. And if somebody claims they've seen a UFO, a skeptic is a person, to me, that is going to try and utilize what available knowledge and science can be applied to understanding some anomalous phenomenon. They're going to rule out any possibilities and potentials that can be explained without an over predisposition toward belief or toward a denialist or skeptical kind of, or doubtful kind of viewpoint. Sharon's very much of the mind to say, I'd really love to be able to find an instance where there is a true anomaly. It's just in most instances where you investigate the paranormal, that's not the case. And I agree with her that really when you dig into all this stuff, whether it be Melba Ketchum and her absurd claims about, sequencing Sasquatch DNA and then publishing a quote-unquote peer-reviewed document in a journal that she actually bought and published it, self-published it herself, and then it comes to light that here it is on this memorial of April Fool's Day. Some of the documents that she cited in her study were actually known April Fool's Day jokes. I mean, it's just like, what are you trying to do? Most often there is a plausible and at times an even absurd explanation underlying a lot of these things. And then you every now and then get an instance like the Pascagoula, Mississippi abduction of Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, which I mentioned all too often during interviews because it's such a good example, and so I won't get into all that right now. But I encourage people to go read that because, again, it's a very compelling story that two men told, and there was no hypnotic regression. There was no instance where they, claim that they woke up in their beds. I mean, these large blue egg-shaped craft come down near them. Beings came off, took them aboard, examined them, put them back down, and they were both visibly disturbed. Still disturbed by the time they got to Sheriff Fred Diamond's office that night. And then when they were left alone in a room with a tape recorder going, they didn't know that there was a tape recorder in the room, but they continued to talk excitedly with one another, as the recording shows, about this encounter, and they were both scared to death of what had happened and had no idea what they had just experienced. There are some instances, while we don't have overt proof of something like extraterrestrial visitation, there are some instances that definitely beg a further, a deeper question and a further look. And I think it's just too easy, way too easy to say, people just make stuff up. People just lie. You know what? They certainly do, but that doesn't explain every instance of anomalous activity that occurs. And I think that there's enough information out there to show that at times, it's a minority of cases where this is the case, but there are times where there are truly undeniably strange things that happen in our existence. And so we have to be able to try and scientifically approach standing those things reasonably and not give ourselves to these old memes like, well, there are ETs that are coming to save us from ourselves and preach the universal space brotherhood. I mean, maybe that's what's really going on. I haven't seen proof of that. So sure, I'm skeptical of that, but I'm not someone who's going to deny the obvious existence of some kind of phenomenon underlying UFOs and a variety of other different kinds of unexplained phenomena.
Another pet peeve of mine, the Alfred Weber Intergalactic Federation of Light and peace and dope and doves. My God. Between him and Pisargano's Obama on Mars and Richard Hoagland's Cat People of Mars and just, my thing is I'm a big fan of Fantasyland and story time.
Yeah.
But, and I'll listen to you, and I'll love it. But at the end of the day, I'll say, oh, well, that was a thing. I'm not going to sit and tout it as reality, and that's where I got to draw the line. And when you go to these conferences and everything, please tell me it's like pro wrestling, where when you get out of the ring, everything's fine. You forget about what happened there, you go have a drink, and and everything's cool, and there's not a lot of people living the role, At least I hope that's how it is when you go to these conferences.
It is. It's all pro wrestling, really. And in fact, and I'll tell you what pro wrestling is. It's the Hegelian dialectic, where people are basically persuaded to choose sides. And then after they choose sides, they fight more with each other than the actual wrestlers on stage. American politics is the same way. And if they're, it's funny because there are people who are out there claiming that there's disinformation being released to UFO researchers. Now, in some instances, I do think that's the case. I really do. But I think that they're even needing to be disinformation or, a shadow government or information withheld from the government. I think that really the best disinformation and the best chaos that can be brought to the serious study of ufology is done by the UFO researchers. The hard-ass skeptics that are on the one side that say everybody who has seen a UFO is just a liar, that does absolutely nothing. Let me repeat, that does absolutely nothing for the serious scientific study and the serious skeptical scientific study of UFOs. Okay, just to deny that they exist does nothing. But by the same token, it's just about as helpful to claim that, we're all being abducted from our homes at night and that only 10% of the population actually remembers it, and those are the chosen few who have actually been inducted already into an intergalactic federation, and that they're here to protect us from the nuclear proliferation, of the American superpower versus Russia or whoever, North Korea or whoever the bad guy of tomorrow or the next day is. There's so much fantasy that's interwoven into all this stuff. And the two quote-unquote warring factions on the extremes do a fine job with that Hegelian dialectic. Yeah, it's just like pro wrestling. And I just try not to, really anger anyone. When I'm sitting there during a panel discussion on stage with Stanton Friedman and Richard Dolan, Rich and I are eye to eye on all this stuff. And I respect Stanton Friedman, and we've been friends for years, but, I don't agree with Stanton on everything that he says and every, preliminary statement that's been made about Roswell, New Mexico. If anything, I don't really know that I believe that Roswell, New Mexico was per se an actual extraterrestrial crash. I think something obviously happened, but there's been so much information and so much bad information that's been touted over the years that a lot of the serious UFO researchers that really dedicated years and years to the Roswell incident, like Kevin Randall and others, they've even come forward and said, it seems after a careful review of all the information that it has taken decades to really to be able to pour over and disseminate, it seems that there may have been less that happened than what we initially thought. I mean, but that's good ufology right there, is let's not just say they're all liars. Let's get into it, let's dig into it, and if it takes us 20 years, let's see what really is going on there. But if the evidence dictates, either for or against the existence of some strange anomalous phenomenon or occurrence, let's accept the evidence and allow the proof to stand where it lands, and take that for what it is and not deny either the presence of or the lack thereof with regard to anomalous phenomenon. And again, with the book, The UFO Singularity, I look at it as a primarily skeptical approach to the study of UFOs. Some of the best compliments I've gotten have been from people in academia, PhD who have reviewed and read the book and who say, it's a really reasonable approach that you've brought to the table here. The hardline skeptics consider it just another UFO book, and they consider it as Robert Schaefer, again, someone who I have respect for, and we befriended one another, but he calls it glib. It's disingenuous because you're presuming that, UFOs exist when you talk about this. And then the believers think that I'm trying to take something away from their sacred cow which is the obvious presence of UFOs and ETs in our midst. They think I'm trying to take something away from it by looking at this and saying, hey, if we had all the answers and these were really extraterrestrials, don't you think that we'd know more about the phenomenon than what we do right now? And the burden that we're left with is that since we can't prove that this is an existent phenomenon yet, and no one else seems to want to take us except for the crazy believers seriously, doesn't that show that there's a problem here and that maybe the approach we've tried to take towards studying all this is flawed somewhere? And so I've just tried to offer an alternative approach to that with UFOs by utilizing existent technology and trends in technology and where they're leading toward, in the future, and how we can apply this sort of science to studying UFOs as opposed to just collecting ad nauseum, the report after report after report and putting them up on websites and databases and stuff, just doing nothing with them like most ufologists over the last several... No, I'm sorry, that's a bad way to put that. Most ufologists haven't done that, but a majority of them certainly, I think, over the years have found it more interesting just to collect stories and do nothing with them. That seems to be ufology, and popular writing about these stories as opposed to really looking hard at them and trying to do something with them. There are certainly researchers out there who have tried to do that and who do a much better job than me. Jacques Vallée and many others. J. Allen Hynek, of course, but there needs to be more of that, and I see that that's probably where we're most lacking in ufology today.
Yeah, I've really, got to take issue with the report, the lights in the sky reports. We learn nothing from that. 99% of light in the sky, red, green, yellow, this big, that big, quarter, dime, pencil head, eraser, moved real fast this way, and then we're done. And it's like, you're gaining nothing from that kind of stuff, and that's, a majority of the stuff that gets posted online and put out there, and, the collection ad nauseum, the collect, well, what the hell are you doing with it,
Yeah.
And it's, you have to say, I've had enough of these reports, I don't need any more, we've learned everything we can from here, don't give me the I saw something in my sky,
The important thing that could be done with information that's collected, which is not done, but which it has been done at times, but when this technology was more in its infancy, Vallée and others would collect reports that the ultimate intention there, I think, Jacques Vallée being, of course, a computer scientist, was to take the reports and apply them through, to algorithms or something like that. Now, a computer to spot trends in terms of, the shape of the craft, the number of witnesses, the time of day, the date, the time of year, all these different kinds of, physical, environmental factors and things that could be applied to a UFO sighting, and then allow a computer to spot trends and then chart that and allow humans to be able to utilize a computer's interpretation of the reports with the hope of taking on a better understanding of what the underlying phenomenon is either trying to do or is attempting to achieve or what its purpose is, these sorts of things. But again, I think Jacques Vallée was trying to do that back in the 90s, and of course with computers today. And more importantly, here it is, it's 2013. By 2018, as I understand, we're supposed to have what they call exascale computation, computers that can do basically 10 to the 18th power what computers today can do. When you have a computer that is so highly advanced like that, and we're literally looking at, just in a few years, reaching computation on that level. I think what one of the MIT professors called the ultimate laptop, a computer that has ability to generate computation at speeds and levels and on a scope that matches literally the summation of all human minds working together on planet Earth at one time. What will that computer be able to do when we feed UFO reports as statistical data into that computer? What will it be able to tell us about the frequency, the purpose, the positioning, all these different things in relation to UFOs? And this is what I'm talking about. We already have computers that do better than what Vallée was able to do in the 1990s when he proposed experiments like this. More people need to be trying to find scientific approaches to utilizing that data and doing something with it today. That's key. That's really one of the most important things, and that's really what we have to try and do if we're going to understand what this UFO phenomenon is. We have to utilize to a greater and a more intelligent degree technologies that are in our possession today, and we've got to really do something with the reports and not call ufology the gathering of reports and doing nothing with the data, because that's not doing anything but campfire tales. That's storytelling, really, is what that is. And my friends Maureen and Jason McClellan at Open Minds had recently told me that one of their regular listeners of their weekly broadcast, Spacing Out, he hated me. He said, Micah Hanks is the problem with ufology today. And of course the idea is that quote unquote good ufology is not getting speculative and not claiming all this future stuff is the answer. We need to look more carefully at the existing reports and try and do something with the existing reports. Really? Exactly. I'm glad we agree. Why again do you disagree with me? Why do you not like me?
Said it better, right? He liked the way he said it better than you did,
Which comes back to that Hegelian dialectic, and in those instances, Chip, unfortunately, once you step off the stage, then you're in the wrestling ring.
Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, that's so very true. That's for sure. I know we touched on Roswell, and what does Roswell have to do with UFO singularity?
Well, Roswell's interesting. I doubt personally that what occurred at Roswell was the crash of a UFO from outer space, an extraterrestrial technology. There are some, I guess, compelling statements that have been made by witnesses who were there at the time. I guess Jesse Marcel, of course, who had been interviewed by Stanton Friedman and others, had claimed that they literally thought that there was an alien craft, an exotic craft that was not of this earth that was recovered. But by the same token, I think that also his testimony at times came into question, clearly. I think he had claimed that he had been a 5-star pilot or something like that, and it turned out that he wasn't a 5-star pilot at all. And also when certain other information came out later on that would contradict what Marcel had said initially. Marcel being, of course, the gentleman, posing there with the wreckage in that famous photograph the day after Roswell. I think, when information would come out that was contrary and was provable, nonetheless, but contrary to what he had said, it was noted that he had changed his story a few times and would continue to do that. So, unfortunately, there are some instances, even in relation to a well-documented case like Roswell, where I think witness testimony can come into question. Now, what I do think Roswell was is that, actually, I should back up and just say briefly that I think that a lot of the interpretation of Roswell as being an extraterrestrial craft that was recovered and that there were bodies involved and whatnot, a lot of that I think has to do with, if not confabulation, I think, bending the facts and the information a bit over the years. And, Andy Jacobson's book about Area 51 that talked about, remote control technologies with genetically manipulated children with very large eyes and all this sort of stuff. I mean, again, she claimed that she had an inside source about that. That information doesn't seem to me much more credible than the earlier interpretations of Roswell actually being a extraterrestrial craft that landed. I think what's more likely is if indeed there was anything going on, it was either a government project along the lines of something like Mogul and some of the official explanations, or perhaps there was some sort of a test craft of some variety that was very exotic, that was utilizing for that time period, very exotic technologies. Philip Corso, of course, from the book The Day After Roswell, had even discussed there being things that looked similar to what we know today as being Kevlar and other things that were amidst the wreckage. And those kinds of technologies, Kevlar, early laser technologies, and these sorts of things were even being developed by the Nazis during the Second World War. So you could even tie it in with the Nazi UFO mythos to some degree. As it's been put to me by other researchers and people who've looked at the Roswell thing far more carefully than I, it seems that there was indeed something that could be defined as an exotic craft that was recovered from New Mexico in 1947. But we don't have enough information to assert that that was an extraterrestrial spacecraft. And even though there are people who in government who have supposed that maybe that's what was going on and that there was some sort of a highly advanced technology that was recovered and carried off to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and whatnot, I don't have available at my disposal in front of me evidence that clearly shows that it was extraterrestrial. I just think that clearly there was something that happened there at Roswell, and it's remained to keep us interested for all these years,
Yeah, as long as the door's kept open with things like that. I was going to ask you about Amy Jacobson and what you thought about her input on everything there, and then the secret source there that came out later and said, I never said nothing about that. Of course.
that's just no different from, I mean, well, it is a little different. I mean, I would, in her defense, I would say Annie's interpretation of what she did was, there was more journalistic integrity to it than, for instance, what Melba Ketchum and her whole fiascos, managed to produce in relation to, peer review, quote unquote, big air quotes right now, peer review of her study. But by the same token, I think that Annie Jacobson and a lot of other people who write for a popular audience that are just desperate to find a different approach to understanding UFOs. There are some pretty, I'll just say, I think some pretty wacko theories, that have been put out over the years, ranging from, allegations about Nazis, building UFOs and stuff after the war, to, Stalin and, being involved in this sort of stuff. And of course, the genetic manipulation of children, and then putting children aboard some remotely controlled craft. I mean, it gets to the point where the quote-unquote plausible earthbound explanation for something like Roswell gets even more far out there than the idea that extraterrestrials were involved. I think it's somewhere in the middle. There was probably something that was going on. It probably did involve, what for that time period was fairly advanced and even exotic-looking craft. But, some of these theories, including what Annie wrote about in her book, they get pretty far out there, and in some instances more off the scale than the extraterrestrial interpretation of the last few decades, which I also don't agree with.
There you go. Yeah, at some point it doesn't have to get any more sensational than it originally, was, right, or is.
It's about, though, brother, they're trying, sensational sells. And when it comes to writing books, somebody told me at the Congress, they said, dude, if you hadn't called your book The UFO Singularity, somebody in Time magazine would have reviewed the thing for you, But the truth of the matter is, my publishers picked out the title, I got to write the book, I got to have Scotty Roberts, my brother, write the foreword for me. But the thing, when you're working with the publishing industry, and that's not a bad thing, they were trying to help me get a title that for this audience it would sell, and that a person who's a UFO enthusiast would want to pick that up and read that book, and I'm thankful for that because that's working. But it's funny because I think by the same token, the person who said that is absolutely right. You remove the UFO word from the equation, and people outside ufology would have taken a book like The UFO Singularity seriously. Not that some of them won't, but again, there are cultural stigmas that are attached to this sort of thing. And really, man, intense speculation and sensationalism, like you said, that's what sells.
That's for sure, and a lot of people, I like to call it out there when they're fighting with each other, it's protecting a product, their product, There's one thing I wanted to work in here. I know we only got a couple minutes left, but I want to jump in with a Rendlesham question because I know your book covers some events in Georgia there near a nuclear plant, I think it is, and or a power substation, that is. Right. You're talking about in the book there may be future people. Now, Pennison and Burroughs have come out with their series of, zeros and ones and say, oh, well, these UFOs that we saw there in Rendlesham were just future, humans exploring the past, something like that. Any thoughts on Rendlesham when it comes to your ideas about the changing of the future that happens with the UFO experiences people have?
We could probably do a whole show on that. I'm not as up to speed on the Rendlesham case as I am some of these others. And the reason why, essentially, is I remember, Sherlock Holmes being asked by Watson whether he took any interest in politics, and Holmes said as little as possible because he didn't want to dedicate precious brain space to, current issues and things like that. And much the same, I think that, as Kevin Randall puts it, there are quote-unquote old geezers who have worked virtually their entire lives to really lay work for cases like Roswell, Rendlesham, and some of these others. Not to say that there aren't things that could still be learned by new researchers today, but with respect to the older researchers, the Randalls and the Brad Steigers, and the Tim Beckleys and the Ivan Sandersons who've written about this stuff in years past, I'll let the research that they have done kind of stand for those cases, and I'm looking at the information obtained from those. I'll maybe take a cursory examination, a thorough, but nonetheless one that's more periphery oriented as opposed to really digging into every aspect of Rendlesham or Roswell. And I try and utilize what knowledge base has emerged over the years with regard to those cases and apply that to, again, the greater collective study of ufology. Now, that said, it's interesting about the revelations that later came out that it could have been an advanced future intelligence at Rendlesham. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. I have heard of other instances where people have claimed that was the case, and that was first brought to my attention by Peter Robbins, the fantastic base researcher. My colleague Ryan Sprague also has taken serious interest in Rendlesham to the point of literally writing a play, an actual stage production play based on the Rendlesham experience, which I'm very excited to see. Hopefully that'll be hitting the stage this summer. Maybe that explanation is as good as any, Chip, and I certainly try and look at ufology from within the context of a potential interaction between humankind and a non-temporal intelligence, or something emanating from what we'd call the future. I look at that in the UFO singularity, and so if indeed that were, at any time, if that were to be found what actually occurred at Rendlesham, I wouldn't really be surprised. If anything, I'd probably just say, I figured as much, because to me, that explanation to some UFO phenomenon is probably as good as, if not better than, the conventional extraterrestrial explanation.
There you go. Thank you very much for coming on, and it's good to know that we dig some of the same people. I was going to say, I'm in the Robbins-Warren camp on that whole story, that's for sure.
Yeah. Robbins is one of the best guys in the world, and that reminds me I need to call him sometime soon. Pete sent me a message. So, yeah, there's some fantastic researchers out there. Again, with respect to them, I'll leave Rendlesham to them because they've done a lot more than I probably ever could for stories like that.
Leave it to the expert, right?
Yep. And in this case, I will.
Cool. All right, well, it's great to have you on, and it definitely time flies quick when you're having fun and having good conversation. And you can find Micah Tuesday nights, 8 to 10 o'clock Eastern out here, doing his show, the Gralien Report. You can catch him at GralienReport.com. You can also get all the books he's written, up to and including the UFO Singularity, on GralienReport.com. You can also catch it on Amazon.com. And check out IntrepidMag.com with him and Scotty Roberts out there doing Intrepid Magazine. Check out their startup, I think it is, right?
That is right, yeah. If you visit GralienReport.com, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll literally see the little Intrepid Magazine Indiegogo crowdfunding. We're just a few days into this, and so we're right at the beginning, but I just ask people from the bottom of my heart to go look at it, see if alternative news and the way that we want to approach that with Intrepid Magazine is something that's meaningful to you, and if so, consider donating a small amount and helping us get this magazine out to a larger audience and approaching these things from a rational but an open-minded perspective.
$5 is all it takes, folks. So a few hundred people do that, we'll be in good business there. Good people doing that magazine, and with Scotty Roberts, I've heard him plenty of times on Church of Mavis, and now you heard Micah Hanks for the first time here. Also good people.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
So that's our show for this week. Thank you for coming on, and I'll shoot you my email and everything here when I get a chance later on. But again, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And, Chip, let's stay in touch, man. Much more to discuss on down the road.
Cool. Thank you very much. And, yeah, we're a couple hours away, but who knows, I might make my way out there sometime soon here. And we can do it in person for a little while.
Sounds good. Sounds real good.
All right. Have a good night. All right, everybody. That is Micah Hanks, author of the UFO Singularity and the GralienReport.com and IntrepidMag.com. Check them out and do your best to see him there. And let's see, that's our show for tonight. Next week we have Paul Kimball coming back for the second time on the show. He was our first live guest. We will be talking about his latest book. Jump on Twitter and follow us on Twitter, Mind Cemetery. Jump on Facebook and like us on Facebook. Get us to 500 by next week, would you? All right, that's our show for tonight. Joe, take us away. Sorry for being over a little bit. It's only 2 minutes.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Mind Cemetery. You can join us every week, Monday nights at 9 p.m.